It was March 16th, 1968, a humid Saturday morning in the Quang Ngai province of South Vietnam. The sun had barely broken through the mist when the rumble of helicopters shattered the dawn calm. To most of the villagers in My Lai, the choppers meant only one thing: danger. They'd seen this before: the thunder of blades, the distant explosions, the soldiers shouting in a language they didn't understand. Mothers clutched their children, old men looked to the skies, praying it would pass. But this morning would be different. This morning would leave a stain on history. From above, a small OH-23 Raven helicopter traced slow circles over the village. Inside sat three young men: Chief Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson, the pilot; Crew Chief Glenn Andreotta, just 22; and Dr. Gunner Lawrence Colburn, barely out of his teens. Their orders were simple: support the ground troops of Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment. Provide reconnaissance, mark enemy positions, report resistance. But as the morning unfolded, they would find no resistance, only something far worse. Andreotta peered through the open door, wind ripping at his face, eyes scanning the fields below. What he saw didn't fit the reports. The village looked peaceful. Women gathering rice, children carrying buckets, an old man leading a buffalo. He frowned. "Where are the VC?" he muttered. From his headset, Thompson's calm voice came through the static. "They said it's a hot zone. Keep your eyes open." But Glenn's instincts told him otherwise. He'd flown over combat zones before. He knew the difference between battle and panic. This was something else. A few minutes later, Thompson got a call from the ground commander. "We've engaged enemy elements. Everything's under control." They circled again. That's when Glenn saw it. Soldiers herding villagers into groups, women, children, old men, all pushed together near a ditch. Something twisted in his gut. "Hugh," he said quietly, "those are civilians." The pilot didn't answer right away. He was watching, trying to make sense of it. Then they saw the muzzle flashes, automatic fire, bodies collapsing into the dirt. Andreotta froze. "Oh my God, they're shooting them." He blinked hard, trying to process it. This wasn't an airstrike or crossfire. This was execution from above. It was clear. No one was shooting back. No weapons, no enemy movement, just Americans firing at villagers. "Jesus Christ, Hugh," he said again, his voice shaking. "They're killing them." Thompson's knuckles tightened on the controls. He said nothing. The helicopter circled once more, lower this time. The ground was littered with bodies. Smoke poured from burning huts. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. For Glenn Andreotta, this was the moment when the war stopped being a mission and became a moral nightmare. He had joined the army out of duty, not hatred. Born in Staten Island, New York, Glenn was the kind of young man who fixed his neighbor IS car for free and stayed late at school to help his friends. He loved music, motorcycles, and the simple things. He believed in decency. But war doesn't care about decency. In Vietnam, he had seen villages burned for suspected VC ties, farmers shot for refusing to move, children crying beside the bodies of their parents. Yet he had always believed somewhere there was a line that good men didn't cross. Now, as he looked down from that helicopter, he realized the line had been erased. Down below, Charlie Company, led by Lieutenant William Calley, was doing exactly what their orders implied: kill anything that moves. To them, My Lai wasn't a village, it was a target. They had lost friends to booby traps and ambushes. They were angry, exhausted, afraid. That morning, anger had become cruelty. As the raven circled again, Andreotta began snapping photos with a small camera. The images blurred through tears and smoke. A woman holding a baby, both shot. Soldiers tossing grenades into huts. Fire spreading across thatched roofs. He turned to Thompson. "We can't just fly over this, Hugh. We have to do something." Thompson's jaw tightened. "We will." They radioed battalion command, reporting civilians being killed by friendly forces. The response came back cold. "Roger, proceed with mission." That was the moment they realized no one up the chain wanted to stop it. Andreotta looked at Colburn, eyes wide with disbelief. "They don't care, do they?" "No," Colburn said softly, "they don't. Thompson made a decision that few men would ever dare. We're going down." The helicopter descended fast, kicking up dirt as it landed between advancing U.S. troops and a group of terrified villagers. Thompson jumped out first, waving his arms. "Hold your fire! There are civilians here." The soldiers stopped, confused. Some stared, some sneered. One shouted, "Sir, these are VC." "No, they're not," Thompson barked back. "You see any weapons?" Andreotta and Colburn followed him out, standing beside the villagers. Andreotta lifted his M60, not at the Vietnamese, but at his own countrymen. "If they shoot these people," he said, his voice trembling, "we shoot back." The standoff lasted only moments, but it felt eternal. Finally, the villagers were allowed to move, escaping toward the trees. Thompson shouted, "Get them out of here, Glenn!" Andreotta helped an old man to his feet, carried a crying boy, lifted them into the chopper. For a few fragile minutes, the line between humanity and horror tilted back toward mercy. When they lifted off again, the radio crackled with uneasy silence. The massacre continued elsewhere, but for that small group, Glenn Andreotta had done what few soldiers dared to do. He had chosen humanity over obedience. That night after returning to base, Glenn sat quietly by the helicopter. He couldn't shake what he'd seen, the smell, the screams, the way the soldiers laughed. He pulled a crumpled letter from his pocket, half written to his family. He stared at it for a long time, then folded it away. He didn't have the words yet. How do you explain to the people you love that your own army just killed the innocent? War breaks men in different ways. Some die in body, others die in silence. But Glenn Andreotta refused to die quietly. He didn't know it yet, but before the month was over, he would give everything he had to make sure the truth of My Lai would not be buried. The Crossroads of Conscience. The sun had begun to fall behind the hills when Glenn Andreotta returned to the base that night. The rotors of the helicopter slowed to a stop, but the sound, the screams, the gunfire, the weeping, still roared inside his skull. The massacre at My Lai wasn't something he could file away as mission complete. It clung to his uniform like smoke. He'd seen men die before, but never like this. Not unarmed, not pleading. He wiped the dirt and blood from his hands, then looked at Thompson and Colburn. None of them spoke for a long time. There was nothing left to say. Hours later, in the dim light of a Quonset hut, Glenn sat with a notebook open in front of him. His hand trembled as he wrote. "We saw Americans killing civilians, hundreds, maybe more. We stopped what we could. God help us." He stopped there. What was the point of writing if no one would listen? He thought about the radio call that morning, when they'd tried to report it and the command had brushed them off. That cold voice in his headset still echoed in his ears. Roger, proceed with mission. Proceed with mission. He clenched his fist. What kind of mission kills children? To understand Glenn Andreotta, you have to understand what kind of war My Lai was. By 1968, American morale in Vietnam was collapsing. The Viet Cong were everywhere, or so they thought. Every village, every farmer, every rice field could hide an enemy. Soldiers were told to bring back body counts instead of victories. Success was measured not in territory gained, but in how many were killed. And when you measure war that way, the line between enemy and civilian disappears. For Charlie Company, led by Lieutenant Calley, that mindset had become reality. They'd lost friends to booby traps hidden in innocent-looking huts. Every time they entered a village, fear whispered that anyone could be VC. When orders came down to search and destroy My Lai, they were told it was a stronghold, filled with guerrillas. So they didn't see people that morning. They saw ghosts, threats, shadows. But Glenn Andreotta saw something else, the truth. The next day, the helicopter crew was ordered to continue operations in the same area. Glenn's stomach turned. The air smelled of smoke and decay. From above, the once green fields were now streaked black with fire and bodies. They flew low, scanning for survivors. That's when Glenn saw it, a small movement near the ditch. Down there, he shouted to Thompson. Thompson turned the helicopter and descended. As they hovered above the muddy trench, the horror came into full view. Hundreds of bodies, twisted, broken, piled together. Women, children, the elderly. The stench of death hung heavy. And then, a faint sound, a cry. Glenn's heart jumped. He leaned out of the helicopter, straining to see. There's someone alive down there. Thompson hovered as low as he could. You sure? Yes, a kid. I see a kid. Without hesitation, Glenn dropped his weapon and jumped from the chopper into the ditch. He waded through the mud and bodies, pushing aside corpses, searching for that small sound of life. He found her, a little girl, barely 5 years old, covered in blood but breathing. Her tiny hands clutched the body of her mother. Glenn's voice cracked. It's okay, I've got you, he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand. He lifted her gently, the child's body trembling in his arms, and climbed back up toward the helicopter as Thompson and Colburn pulled him in. For a moment, the war paused. In that cockpit, among all the destruction, there was a heartbeat, proof that compassion could still exist. They flew the child to a nearby hospital base and handed her to medics. Glenn watched as they carried her away, then turned silently back toward the field. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "If she's alive, then how many others could be?" Thompson nodded grimly. Too many to count. That night, they filed another report, this time directly to the American Division headquarters. They detailed what they had seen. Civilians executed, villages burned, unarmed people gunned down. No one responded. Days passed. The paperwork vanished into silence. But Glenn Andreotta couldn't stay silent anymore. He began gathering names, notes, and sketches. He talked to villagers who had survived, to soldiers who had been there but refused to speak. He wasn't an officer. He wasn't powerful. But he believed that truth had to mean something, even in war. He told Thompson one night as they cleaned the chopper's rotors, "You know, Hugh, they'll probably call us traitors." "Maybe," Thompson said, "but I'd rather be a traitor to a war than to my own soul." It was the defining struggle of Vietnam, not between East and West, communism or democracy, but between conscience and obedience. Glenn Andreotta had chosen conscience, and in doing so, he'd become a target of a different kind. Rumors spread among the troops. Those helicopter guys think they're better than the rest of us. Thompson's crew, the ones who pull guns on their own men, in a place where survival depended on trust, Glenn began to feel the weight of isolation, but he didn't back down. He told himself, if I stay silent, they win twice. 2 weeks later, on April 8, 1968, Glenn Andreotta's helicopter was called to rescue another downed crew near the same area. It was supposed to be routine. But as they approached the site, they took heavy ground fire. Bullets ripped through the cockpit. The chopper shook violently. Glenn leaned out to mark the landing zone, and that's when it happened. A single shot tore through the fuselage. Glenn Andreotta was hit. He slumped against the frame, blood pouring down his chest. Thompson shouted, "Glenn, Glenn, stay with me!" But it was too late. The young man who had saved lives at My Lai, who had dared to stand against the tide, fell silent forever. He was 22 years old. The war went on, but something had changed. Thompson and Colburn carried on their mission, but the memory of that day and Glenn's courage burned in them. For years they have fought to bring the truth forward, to have My Lai investigated, to make sure the world knew what had really happened. And finally, in 1970, their testimonies broke through the silence. The U.S. Army was forced to confront what happened. Lieutenant Calley was charged and convicted for murder. Justice came late, but it came, and it carried Glenn Andreotta's name with it. They buried him in Staten Island under a gray sky. On his gravestone, simple words, he gave his life that others might live. But the true measure of Glenn Andreotta's legacy isn't carved in stone. It lives in the faces of those he saved, in the memory of a little girl who grew up because he refused to look away, in the conscience of every soldier who ever asked themselves, what is right when everyone else is wrong? Echoes of My Lai, the legacy of Glenn Andreotta. When the guns finally fell silent in Vietnam, the echoes of My Lai did not fade. They lingered in the conscience of a nation, in the nightmares of soldiers, and in the pages of history that America tried to forget. Glenn Andreotta's name was not printed in the first reports. When the Army released its official findings, he was a footnote. A quiet figure among the chaos, one of the few who chose to act when humanity collapsed. But to those who were there, his name meant something far greater. He was proof that courage could survive even in hell. In the years after 1968, the American public began to hear whispers of something unspeakable. Letters home, rumors among returning soldiers, fragments of stories that didn't match the official line. Then, in late 1969, journalist Seymour Hersh broke the story to the world. My Lai Massacre, the headline read, U.S. soldiers slay hundreds of civilians. The world was stunned. Images of the massacre, women, children, old men lying dead in ditches, flooded newspapers and television screens. The myth of the heroic American liberator was shattered overnight. And in the background of every photograph, in every courtroom testimony, Glenn Andreotta's quiet act of defiance shone through like a light in the fog. The Army tried to contain the damage. They launched the Peers Commission, an internal investigation, but what they found was worse than anyone expected. Lieutenant Calley had ordered the executions. Captain Medina had failed to stop them. and dozens of soldiers had participated, willingly or not, in the slaughter of over 500 unarmed civilians. Only 3 men had tried to stop it: Hugh Thompson, Lawrence Colburn, and Glenn Andreotta. The report described what they did that day, landing their helicopter between American troops and fleeing villagers, threatening to open fire on their own if the killings didn't stop. Rescuing the wounded. For that, Thompson and Colburn were vilified for years, called traitors, cowards, even communist sympathizers. Glenn Andreotta never lived to hear the accusations, but his death and his actions became part of a larger truth: the cost of doing the right thing. In 1970, the trial of Lieutenant William Calley became a national spectacle. The defense claimed he was following orders, the same justification heard after every atrocity in history. But the jury saw the images, heard the testimonies, and the verdict was clear: guilty of murder. Calley was sentenced to life in prison, but served only 3.5 years under house arrest. The message was bitter: those who killed walked free. Those who tried to stop them carried the burden forever. Glenn Andreotta's parents received a folded flag and a brief letter from the U.S. Army. No medals, no speeches, just a few official words. He died in the line of duty. But in 1998, 30 years after My Lai, that silence was finally broken. The U.S. military posthumously awarded Glenn Andreotta, Hugh Thompson, and Lawrence Colburn the Soldier A.S. Medal, the Army's highest award for bravery, not involving direct combat. It was long overdue. At the ceremony, Colburn, now gray-haired, his voice trembling, spoke to the audience. "We didn't stop to think about medals that day. We just did what we thought was right. Glenn paid the price for it, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that." History often remembers the generals, the victories, and the empires, but sometimes it's the smallest act of humanity that defines an entire war. Glenn Andreotta didn't write books or give speeches. He wasn't a commander or a strategist. He was a young man, barely 22, who saw horror and refused to look away. He represents what war tries to erase: compassion, morality, empathy. If you visit Staten Island National Cemetery today, you can find his grave. It's quiet there, a small stone among thousands. Visitors leave flowers, dog tags, sometimes handwritten notes. One note reads, "You made us remember what it means to be human." Another, from a veteran who served in Vietnam: "I wasn't there that day, but you gave me the courage to tell the truth about what I saw." The legacy of Glenn Andreotta lives not in statues or parades, but in conscience. In classrooms where history teachers dare to show the pictures of My Lai. In soldiers who learn that sometimes the hardest command to follow is your own heart. And in that little girl he saved, the one from the ditch who survived to tell her story decades later. She grew up in a rebuilt village. She said she never forgot the face of the man who carried her to the helicopter. "He was the only one who looked at me with kindness," she said. "I thought he was an angel." War's not just about battles and flags. It's about choices, the kind that define who we are when the world loses its soul. Glenn Andreotta made his choice. He chose compassion over compliance, truth over silence, humanity over obedience. And though he died young, his name stands tall in the quiet ranks of history's truest heroes. So the next time someone says war makes monsters of men, remember Glenn Andreotta, the man who, in the darkest moment of the Vietnam War, proved that goodness could still exist.